Right. So coaches who want to make a difference in the lives of their athletes and they believe in the importance of relationships to do that. Right. This is oftentimes the foundation of transformational leadership in many ways. It's having relationships to make an impact. So for these coaches, like many of you listeners here and myself, it's scary. It's a vulnerable and uneasy move to make as a coach, to start to challenge, to demand, to be hard on your players. We're unsure of how players might respond. Will they quit on us? Will they wall up? Are they right to? Like, are we being too hard and demanding? How will parents and maybe even our administrators respond? Will they be unhappy with us? Will that lead to more conflict, drama, maybe even us losing our job? There's a lot on the line when you think about challenging athletes. And yet it has never been, when you really think about it, more difficult, I think, to be demanding as a coach for that reason. The influence of parents and administrators. And at the same time, I don't know if it's ever been more important for us as coaches to hold our athletes to high standards, like more than ever. I really think that lowering the standards for them is either saying we don't believe they can meet the standards, and sometimes we do, like have to lower the standards to where they are capable and able to meet them. But I think so often when we lower the standards, we're telling them subconsciously, like, I don't think you can make it. The other thing that I think we do when we lower the standards is we say, hey, we don't care enough. We don't care enough to have the courage to step into this uneasy space, to challenge, to risk. And at the same time, we know that them meeting those high standards will have a huge impact on their life. So here in today's conversation with high school basketball coach Jonathan Toczynski, JT, as we call him, and this is part 2 of our conversation, we're going to learn about how he has established a culture where he then can be demanding, where then he can have very high standards, and the players aren't just going to accept those high standards and meet them. They're actually going to appreciate it, maybe even love you for it. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman. I'm joined by one of my co-hosts today, Nate Sanderson. Betsy sat this one out. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better culture. To get to notes to this and every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC weekly newsletter. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can hop on over to tocculture.com and subscribe there. Let's unpack some of the things that you do within just some of the culture building activities. Some of the culture days. What have been some of the most impactful ones that you've had your team do over the years that you might recommend other coaches try out?
The first one early on the year, even my seniors this past year always came back to our speed dating activities, especially when we have new players that are in the varsity team, maybe underclassmen that now have come or transfers that have come. And this past year, we had them line up across from each other. We had small whiteboards, and we're just using that as collisions, asking kind of questions to get to know one another. But then we'll also add some kind of vulnerable questions, kind of, what are your fears about this season? What are you concerned about? So we use that at the moment as collisions to kind of learn about each other, but also dive into that vulnerability side. One other culture day we've done that I really enjoyed was hero and hardship, where players will have a sit in a circle. They share their hero. With that, they'll share a highlight in their moment in time, whether it's regards to basketball or just in life. And then one hardship. And I remember a player, he also played football, and he almost got teary-eyed talking about his hardship. And what that kind of gave the team in that moment was us taking the walls down a little bit, especially asking teenagers to be vulnerable is really difficult, but having a space where they can be. And they saw this player in a different light. And he was actually one of our leaders and one of our captains. And that just made his voice, because in that moment he was able to get so vulnerable, where he shared something so upsetting where he was almost about to cry, where when he would speak up or when he would bring the guys in during practice or during a game, you really knew it was a place of coming from love because of that moment. So those are two my players really, really enjoy.
There's 2 other really cool culture days I'd love for you to share with the listeners because, yeah, I love those ones that you're doing there, or the speed dating. You got to give Nate a big shout for that.
Hmm.
He's been doing that for years. But a big one is the team community service that you do every year, where you bring your team out, you actually serve in the community. And then you even mentioned earlier the Hell Day. Could you just kind of give us an overview of those 2 culture days?
So since I've been at Woodbridge, the community service, we go to St. Joseph Seniors Home. The players go, and it's usually right before Christmas time. Um, we usually go there. They'll play with pool noodles and they'll hit balloons with the senior citizens. They'll dance and put on performances. The one time this year they did their chair exercises and they're leading the group and you have these, tough, tough kids and basketball players and they're doing these exercises. And I it's just a great day, and it just reminds them there's more to this 3-month stretch than just basketball, and it's really evident there. The one we spoke to someone who was a blind chess player. He was from the South, um, would share stories because he was in the military. And last season, on the bus ride to games, periodically, they would start chanting the song the military song that he sang for them. And it's just a really, really, really cool day, a way for us to kind of give back to the community. And then with the Hell Day, um, usually I've done it where it's just one big day that we do. For this year, the first week of the season, the first week of practices, we did a little Hell Day activity after every practice. Um, and it's just them doing something really, really hard together. Of how much do you really want to be a part of something special? How much do you want to be a part of something that's different than everyone else? So as soon as they've had a 2-hour grueling practice, now we're doing bear crawls or now we're doing burpees and kind of CrossFit exercises that we put together. Um, and I tell them leading up to it, like, look, at any point in time, you can walk out. And unfortunately, we had a player walk out. I said, you can walk out, and you could just say, I'm not. This is not for me. I can't do this, and that's okay. But we tell them we do this because we know you can do this, and we know you guys can become the team that you have told us you want to become. And in those moments of hell day, they really rally together and they get through it. Um, and those are always really excited. And then me and my coaching staff hop in, and I try to can I get a couple breaks on the side while they're not watching me because I can't catch my breath? But then they get excited seeing us kind of sharing some sweat equity with them. And it's just doing really hard stuff together. Where now we use that as a story. Come the end of the season, we're not performing at our peak, or other team went on the run, crowd's going crazy, and we're in a timeout. And I'm look at them and I just say, "Look, we've done harder things than this. Do you remember Hell Day from the first day of practice? You remember Hell Week, where half you guys look like you're asking for the garbage can because you're about to throw up? This is nothing. The team just this is an 8-0 run, guys. We've done harder stuff." And you see the belief and they start nodding their heads like, "Oh yeah," like, and it's just a story for us to use. But those are two really exciting days that we or time periods that we go to.
JT, I got a question for you. As you have evolved here, and I think have kind of found your stride, maybe is a way to describe it, what seems to be a comfort level with who you are and what you're doing. What are your feedback loops like in your program right now? I mean, you've talked about kind of having one-on-one conversations, and you talked about being curious when you started in the program. Now, having done it now for a few years, where do you find the greatest source of authentic feedback for you from people within your program?
I would say it's the one-on-one with the players, and especially after the season where there's nothing there's no repercussions. And I really look forward to having those end of season one-on-ones where I try these new processes. Um, we've had the ups and downs of the season, and then we're able to sit down in a very informal environment and just kind of share, like, what'd you like, what didn't you like? And those feedbacks have been really, really impactful. Um, Asking them what's one thing that we should start doing, what's one thing we should stop doing. I shared with them my commitment goal from the beginning of the year, reminded them of that. Did I reach that? Did I hit that commitment goal? Um, and those are more one of my more favorite conversations of having with players and getting that honest feedback where the season's over. There's no pressure of the next practice or the next game or how is this going to carry over into those moments. But those one-on-ones are really valuable to me.
There was one last year, which would have been 2024,
Mhm.
You had a tough one-on-one with somebody. I remember, and it was an exit interview, and you were a bit nervous about where that relationship would go, and you tried something different, and you felt like it was a breakthrough. Could you tell that story?
I had a player who we just didn't get along, and we just clashed and we clashed. Um, and not someone that would open up to me much. And I kind of in that season felt, well, he wasn't impacting the team very much. Um, he was engaged for trying hard, and I kind of just let it go. When we had that one-on-one, I went into it with that player of, hey, I sometimes struggle with wanting to be liked. I struggle with wanting everyone here to have a great experience. Um, because when I played, I didn't really have the greatest of experiences with my coaches. And I was kind of vulnerable in that moment. And he gave me a lot of tough feedback, told me that I wasn't demanding enough, said that he wasn't too sure when can he be someone that is full of joy, is joking, because I can kind of switch between the two. He even felt that maybe early on in my starting at Woodbridge that he even told me that it was too late to be more demanding, that you started off kind of wanting to include everyone, um, that he felt that I couldn't go the other way now. And we might have sat for it was literally a 2-hour conversation, and we just got everything out. Um, and while some of it was difficult, shaping up into this season we just had and the relationship we have now, it's really progressed and um, he's turned into kind of one of my favorite players that I've had.
Yeah, I remember that. That was almost like a testing point for that relationship, and you were
Mhm.
really uncertain. I actually remember you recounting the conversation to me, and you may not remember this, but you talked about how you asked him a question, and the first answer he kind of gave you wasn't like it was kind of like a 10-second response. And we kind of maybe anticipated that he would come up with some walls. And so we talked about embracing silence in that moment. And I think you
Mhm.
just am I right in that you just kind of sat with
Yes,
it, and then all of a sudden 2 hours happened.
because he was and he still is not someone that's going to share everything. He's very guarded, and I remember that clearly. First question, it might have been 5, 10 seconds, and I'm like, okay, this is great. And I just sat there, and we just kind of were like looking at each other and just letting that silence sit. And he just kind of unloaded and just sitting in the silence and sitting in the awkwardness, which for me, I can't stand. But being able to be comfortable with that, and he just unloaded. Um, so yeah, sitting with the silence was definitely a key moment. Well, I don't know how that conversation would have went.
Do you even remember what the question was? I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I can. I don't
I
know if it
think
really matters. It's about the silence, I think, mostly, right?
I think the question was the first question I asked was like, "What's hard about being coached by me?"
That's what it
Because I
was.
said,
That's what it
"Obviously, this
was.
isn't working. Like, we're both not enjoying our relationship's not great. We're both not enjoying this." And maybe had a 10 quick answer. And I think in that moment, he was trying to see how far he can go. And I was
Mm.
kind of like, I just sat there with it. And I think once he saw that, he realized I was really trying to unlock this relationship and gain the feedback needed to make some changes. Um, I think that was the first question I asked him, and once he kind of saw that, where I didn't have an answer, I was actively listening and not just trying to come up with an answer that he could just say yes, coach to. I think that kind of unlocked the conversation.
That's honestly one of my favorite stories because people think, "Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to go ask my players that." Right? And how many people could sit into an exit interview and just go, "Hey, what's the hardest thing about being coached by me?" But you did a few things that are really helped to make that an effective and create the conditions for that person to share. Now, he could still have chosen not to share, but you
Mhm.
were vulnerable first. You asked the question. You embrace silence. Right? That took courage to be vulnerable. It took courage to sit in that silence, that awkwardness. Right? That's intentionality. Right? I think
Mhm.
that's and before that we were on a call preparing for that. Like, how do we help this, right? And it's just once
Mhm.
again you having the courage to step into that space. You mentioned in those exit interviews, JT, you had conversations asking about this commitment goal, your commitment goal for the year of how you're going to get better as a coach, and you were asking the players if they felt like you improved at that. explain a little bit about that process of landing on this year, that big improvement goal. And when you set that at the beginning of the year, what you kind of learned about yourself, and then what you learned about yourself throughout the year as you worked on this big thing.
That came from our community change practice that we did, and we kind of sat down and I went over, okay, this is the coach I wanted to become. This is the what my players are saying they need more from me. And then I kind of dived into, well, what am I actually doing? And diving into what am I worried about with being more demanding or being tougher on my players? Worrying about not being liked or worried about having the experience that I had that I didn't want my players to have. And I remember that meeting with you, JP, and I almost got a little bit emotional because I really wanted to become this, but I'm so worried about this, you know, having the relationship with my players and caring about their experience and having those competing commitments. And it made me realize I can let go of some of the things that I hold tight to me. Not every player has to really like Coach T in that moment. And I dropped some of those kind of parts, not that it wasn't important, but being okay with the experience not always being so positive. Um, Going into the season, one of the first meetings we had when we did our standards review, I shared that commitment goal with them. And one of the first things that I said was my non-negotiable being on time. I said, look, if you're not on time to shoot around, which is before a game, you're not playing. And they all looked at me, coach, you're crazy. And I kind of stated to them, in the past, we would do makeup time, whereas if you were late 5 minutes, you would have to work out for an extra 5 minutes. But I just felt that it wasn't really a non-negotiable for me, nor was it with the goal of me wanting to be more demanding. Um, so going on to the into the season, we had some moments where players were late to shoot around, and they were really, really important players to us, and they sat those games. And I think that's when they realized at first. I remember when the one player did not make shoot around on time. I think he was maybe 2 or 3 minutes late, and I told him, unfortunately, you're not playing. Walking away, and I hear him tell the other teammates. I hear one player goes, "Oh crap, coach is really serious about this." And from there, players were showing up 15 minutes early as we agreed upon with that standard. They kind of were policing each other. And I realized, and that was just kind of one small step in me being the coach. I'm not the most demanding coach. I'm still working towards that, but that this year kind of proved that it can be done in a way that is not transactional. And I just recapping my one-on-one, just ending my one-on-ones maybe 2 months ago, early March. I felt that during the year, even having those conversations, the relationships were even greater because I was giving them something that they wanted. I was becoming someone that they respected even more. And my thought of being worried that the relationship would falter because I am being more demanding, I'm taking away playing time for you just because you're late. Um, they respected it even more. And it was actually that player we talked about earlier, where we didn't have the greatest relationship. He happened to be one of the players that would be late to the shoot around. And even though he didn't like it in the moment, come the end of the season, like he was performing at a really, really high level. So,
No, no, I mean, what you're sharing here is really huge. So, in the immunity to change model, which is by the psychologist Keegan and Leahy, there's this
mhm,
idea of like, hey, we want to be better at this, but there's things that are working against us, right? It's like one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake, and the foot on the brake is there because you know you want to be well liked, but there's also you didn't want to be an asshole. Like you didn't want to be
mhm,
viewed as an asshole. Like that was one thing I remember you saying. I don't want to be that asshole coach, right?
yep,
And so a way of operating, the way you've been coaching has actually helped you to be successful in achieving that, right? Players do like you. They don't see you as an a-hole, right? Like those types of things. So the idea of changing feels like that's at risk in this for you. And it's probably even greater. Like, I mean, you think about seeing those players and knowing you and knowing a lot of our coaches that I know out there. Okay, losing on Friday night was probably a big fear and seeing that player, but losing that relationship is probably the greatest fear.
mhm,
And you did it in a way where you emphasized, hey, here was the standard, here's the choice you made. You chose not to be on time. Now you have the consequence, right? And And then what you learned was the relationship actually became stronger. Am I right in that? Like, even in that moment, what was like, was there a big fallout after that for a few days, or what happened?
No, and I think what's important to that was a conversation I had before the game. Is after the shoot around, I would set the player down, and I remember being nervous, like, "Oh no, is this player going to be upset with me?" And I remember just being calm, sharing, here's our non-negotiable, here's our consequence. But I also kind of stated with him, like, look, I'm doing this because I know you can reach a level that you have no idea you can reach. I believe in you so much that being on time, like, you can be so, so, so good. And I said, but unfortunately, like, here's the consequence. And I think framing it like that, he realized, like, this isn't coach being a jerk. He really, really believes in me. He's gonna have a really, really high standard for me. Um, and it just kind of led to him changing his mindset, and that helped change his behavior. And he would regularly be someone that would show up from that point on, first person at the gym. And it kind of just strengthened our relationship, just being more demanding, but also in a way that still valued the relationship.
Right there, that was magical feedback, right? In that moment with that player, you sat down with them, the magical feedbacks references from Culture Code, and I shared it in the culture system, right? Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. You sat down with that individual and said, we've got really high standards here. We're counting on you. We believe in you. We know you can do it, right? And so the way you communicated that feedback, and I remember that you were really shit yourself. I remember getting a message from you coming in going, oh gosh, I got to have this conversation. And yet I was like, okay, all right, how do we make this go well, right? And
Mhm.
you knew what to do, and you step in there, you have the conversation, and then he actually was like, oh, coach is doing this because he believes in me, not because he's an a-hole, right?
Yes, yes. And yeah, and he just someone that always was there on time. And during the peak of our season, during the playoffs, he was one of our better players, which was, and I told him that, he had a really great run. And now he's trying to get into colleges. We're working on his letter of recommendations, his application letters, and this was a player a year ago that could not stand me, and we had no relationship. So um, it's kind of one of my favorite stories.
So let's talk real quick. We've got a few minutes left here, but I just wanted to spend a
Mhm.
little bit of time because I think, we've talked a lot about accountability off the court or, and for other coaches off the field, whatever it be, right? And I'm really would love for you to talk about how do you hold really high standards in practice, right? It's January, it's February, you know, players are tired, they're not working hard. What's your system for enforcing really high standards in practice?
Well, to start the practices, we have our quick set we do, where it's a few drills where they have to hit certain behavior marks that they can control, such as talking or sprinting or calling out the passer. And that sets the tone for practice. And I don't judge whether they make shots. I don't judge whether the basketball side of things are clean. It's just focusing on their behaviors and getting them ready for practice. And if they don't sprint, or if one person out of the group does not yell out the passer's name, I blow my whistle, we have a reset, and they do it all over again. And that kind of sets the tone for practice. That gets them calling each other up of, hey, make sure that we're talking here. And then when we get to the practice side and we start going into drills and working on our game plans, if there is slippage in the practice, there's a kind of a few things that I do. Sometimes I'll still go to those huddles that we talked about earlier, but sometimes I'll go to my captains and I'll go to my captains, hey, do we need a timeout here? Because this isn't up to standard. And they'll either say yes, coach, or no, coach. And I try to push it on them to kind of run the timeouts or run the huddles, um, and get them calling people up. And that kind of generally helps out. If it comes to a point where it's still not changing, then I'll just ask a player to kind of just sit this one out, and I'll just go over to them and ask them, hey, what's up? Like, you're not competing today, and they'll kind of share what might be going on, or maybe they're just having a bad day. But just removing them from the drill, and then once they're at a good framework, a good mindset, we'll kind of introduce them back into the drill. And usually that's all it really needs is just kind of a quick reset or pulling them out of a drill. Um, and usually the players know kind of, yes, they're not giving high effort. They know. Um, they will keep trying to get through the practice, see if coach notices, but just pulling them out, having that conversation, seeing if there is anything wrong and then getting them back into it, with kind of putting it on my captains or players to kind of call some huddles if needed, helps us kind of keep performing at a high level.
I remember distinctly about 5, 6 years ago, you saying as you started to make a shift into using like sitting players out of
Mhm.
drills or resets, you were like, JP, this is harder than putting them on the line and run. What was so much harder about this way of coaching for you? And why is it actually so important? Like, what do you see as the effect on your program?
It's harder because I think the default is just yell or just scream. Coaching how I was coached. I've 18 years of me being coached a certain way, and that's kind of my default. This really requires the intentionality. But for my practices, I have on my practice plan. I plan out my interventions that I plan on using that day. It requires an extra step of preparing. And then when you're in the moment, and yes, it is an emotional game, practice, you want your practice to be competing. You have to really kind of sit and be mindful of that. And then we'll bringing in questions. Are you giving really good, like when you bring them to a huddle, are you using really good questions, not being Captain Obvious, or setting up before practice with my captains, hey, if I want a player to really work on their leadership skills, I'm going to set kind of a situation here where I might get upset. I want you to come in. So it just requires an extra step of preparation. But at the end of it, what's really important is that it maintains the relationship, where yelling and screaming and making them run doesn't. Where this still maintains the relationships, maintains the respect between each other. Um, and that's really, really important for the culture of the team.
And I mean, I think you laid out so many of the positive benefits there. But I'd be curious, and you could push back on this. Feel free to do
Mm.
that. I may be putting words in your mouth here. It's not my intention, but I don't feel like you have a big sense of entitlement in your program within players. Like, and I personally believe that this drives out or squashes out this sense of entitlement. Like, practice is a privilege. It is an opportunity to get better. Do you think that that lands true in this case for your team?
I would say so. Obviously, the culture of basketball, at times we are fighting that. When you have media coming to your games and promoting players, but kind of telling players, "Hey, we get to do this. We don't got to do anything." Like using those mantras, um, going back to the culture days of the community service, reminding them of that it's more than just basketball. It definitely disarms that, and we try to we say like the ego is evil, and we kind of try to keep that away.
There's one thing that I think that you also learned in this that you haven't touched on, and this is in some of the conversations you've had. There's been part of you that, in your intentionality, you are a fixer. You want to get better, but you started to get better this year at maybe allowing them to experience their emotions and not always trying to step in and fix everything. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, in the past, when a player would be upset, or whether it's about playing time or they're not performing well in practice, or there'll be a conflict between two players in practice just because they're competing hard, my natural instinct would want to go and fix it. And I felt that didn't really land great. Um, Almost I was annoyance to them. Where I learned this year, if a player's upset with me, let time kind of do its thing. And that's what that I had to learn. That's what's going to come with having high standards and being more demanding, is that they're not all going to enjoy you or the more process at that moment. But if you put the time into building the relationship beforehand, um, that what you're doing is right. So I kind of just let that sit and linger. I had to get comfortable with that and not go right into kind of my people pleaser fixer mentality. But that definitely strengthened the relationship. And being comfortable with that allowed us to have uncomfortable moments that were needed to grow this season.
All right, JT and JP, I've got a question for both of you here, kind of as we wrap up this conversation here today. So I'll ask you, JT, first, and give you a chance to think while I give JP the same question here from a bit different angle. But obviously, you've been doing this with JP now and been on this journey for 7 years. Came into it as a freshman coach. Now you're a more experienced varsity coach. I'm curious if you would just kind of share with us, what is the growth edge for you now? Because I'm sure that it's different than what it was when you first started, 7 years ago. So, what is it on the horizon for you? What's the next frontier for your growth, whether that's personally or in your program? And JP, you also have evolved quite a bit over the last 7 years. And I'm sure that you are coaching JT differently, perhaps now than what you were when you started with him 7 years ago. And we've had a lot of conversations about the difference between consulting and coaching. And, you've obviously done a lot of work to grow in that area. So when you think about just how you've approached these relationships, how are you different now than when you started with JT? And we'll let JT go first here.
I think what's next in the frontier is I think of back to even teachers or coaches that I've had, and the ones who were pushed me beyond belief, that were really, really demanding. I think about them as such high regard. And that's kind of someone that I want to become, where they're saying he's really, really hard to play for. So I think for me, it's continuing being more demanding, sitting with kind of what's being uncomfortable, where early on in my career, I'd want to fix it. I want this to be a positive experience. Being okay with that, that's kind of my North Star, is where players would come back and say, like, it's really, really hard to play for him, but you're gonna love every minute of it. And that's kind of what I'm really shooting for as compared to earlier in my career.
Yeah, and you're definitely moving in that direction, you know, and I'd love for JT to maybe answer this question before I go actually. What have you noticed the most different in our conversation 7 years ago to what they are today?
They are shorter. We almost finish each other's thoughts, but I would say now, um, it's less telling and it's more kind of questions to kind of lead questions in terms of helping me come up with the answer. Um, and it's just kind of reminding me of strategies that I do know. And it's not so much, hey, breaking down strategies, here's step by step, but more so not giving me advice, just kind of asking me a bunch of questions to kind of help me formulate my own answer or my own strategy to then use in that next day in practice or next meeting. So that's how it's definitely evolved from my end.
Yeah, I think I'm really proud of the fact that, I've tried to really work on myself as a coach so that I could ask better questions and not have leading questions, but really, especially with someone like JT, who's we've worked with together for so long, he knows everything, right? He's read the books, he's been in the books. I've even, used some of his stories in the books. He's listened to the podcast. We're not hopping on calls for me to give him a new idea. I mean, yeah, there are sometimes, hey, here's
Hmm.
something new. Let's try this.
Hmm.
The wheel of discipline, or we did last year for guys showed up late in the offseason. We always, yeah, it's cool to try new things, and that's what I love about JT is he will go for it. But what I love in my work with JT is that he creates that space. He's not a morning person. He rolls out of bed. It's 6:15, but he does that because that's the time that I'm available for him, and it's just such commitment. But my work there is really about recognizing that JT is whole. He doesn't need me to come in with a lot of advice. It's about holding that space for him to reflect. Sometimes it's let him process the emotions and thinking that he has going on. And then through questions and reflecting, back what I'm hearing from him, I think he's able to pretty much figure out what he needs to do and then have the courage to do it. I'm not giving him pep talks telling him, come on, man, you can do this. Like JT finds the courage in himself. I don't know if I've ever given you a pep talk. Maybe I barked at you once or twice on an audio message well, after one day, but really it's you find the courage because it's how you show up. So for me as a coach, it's just holding that space for him. And for some reason he keeps wanting to work with me. So JT, we've talked a lot about your intentionality, your change, and your growth. And so, as we're kind of wrapping up here now, my question for you is when you look back at, you've been coaching for over 10 years now, what hasn't changed for you? Like, what hasn't changed? There's been a lot of change, a lot of growth. And I think that a lot of coaches look at that and go, you know, they worry about these change of losing parts of themselves that are unique to them, that make them special, that have helped them to be successful. I think it's probably the biggest barrier to significant growth in all of us, is that we have certain success, and then we think if we change, potentially even like messy parts of us, that we might lose the parts that have helped us be successful. So when you look back on it, what hasn't changed for you?
I think for me, it's just knowing why I'm doing this, and it's just coming back to how much joy I have being with the players, building those relationships, being someone with joy. That it really hasn't changed. The strategies, what I've done might have changed, but just connecting and building a relationship with the players, that kind of hasn't changed.
Mm. No, I love that. It's authentic, and yeah, I'm grateful for that answer, and I'm grateful for the relationship that we've had, and the times we do get to meet up in person, and our amazing morning chats and conversations there. It's been an incredible privilege to share the journey with you, and I think you've captured very well your story and what you've shared today. So thanks for coming on the podcast, man. That's it for our conversation with JT. Now, one of my favorite things about JT is his ability to connect with players, not just connect with his players off the court, but in difficult moments. Like when he has to hold them accountable, he connects that accountability back to the goals and standards that they all agreed to earlier in the year. And then they're more willing to not just accept it, but appreciate it, because, well, that's his job and that's what they agreed to. He's also able to connect the hard moments back to the hell days, the mental challenges that he's pushing them through. Those things become catalysts, right? They become really important things, reference points in the season that he can come back to. But that's all about his ability to connect, right? Constantly connecting their experiences. Now, thanks to JT for coming on. If you want to reach out, we'll have his email in the podcast notes. Be sure to get those notes and our weekly culture building tools by going to tocculture.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter.